Hello and welcome to the Three View Mirror podcast, a podcast where we help you relive the glory days, if those were glory days for you like they were for us, of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. A podcast where every week one of the hosts takes a turn and comes up with three seemingly random, completely unrelated topics that at the end of the episode they'll check in with the rest of us and see if we have a clue what they're talking about. And sometimes, depending on who the host is, there are weeks when we have a little bit more of a clue what they're talking about, and Chelle weeks are the weeks we call the ones where we generally don't know what the hell she's talking about. But that being said, we make sure we have a good time and we talk over a broad range of topics. Now, every once in a while, we get what in the 80s we used to refer to as a special guest star, somebody that comes in to elevate our game to a whole new level. And this week, it's Wimberley Earp. Wimberley, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi guys, thank you for having me on here. This is a privilege because I watch you all and absolutely love your content. So I am on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. I combine parenthood skits with nostalgia humor. I find in my everyday life this is a literal occurrence where I am comparing then versus now, which is a lot of what my content is bringing back the nostalgia and relating it to what our kids are going through now.
I'm also joined by two other co-hosts today, Chelle and Chris. Guys, take a second, introduce yourselves.
I'm Rochelle Oblak, better known as Gen X Chelle across my social media channels, which you can find me on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and I generally do nostalgia and life over 50.
And I'm Chris Clues, better known as Chris Clues, a keynote speaker and author that talks about and writes about the lessons that we can learn for work and life from 80s pop culture. And I'm wearing my hat exactly the way I want to, just so I can upset John.
And then finally, my name is John Catrides, better known as Gen X Jono on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And like Chelle and Chris and Wimberley, I like to pretend that I still live in the 80s, although my favorite thing in the world is to take the lessons we learned then and bring them into today. Now, today we're very fortunate that Chelle, Chris, and I don't have to do the heavy lifting. We just need to see if we can find out the hidden connection in the three different topics that Wimberley brought to us today. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Wimberley, get started, and see what topics she brought for us today.
All right. Thank you, John. So I have an absolute love for the 80s and the 90s, in particular music and movies. So I have three movies that are the topics today. The first one is Pretty Woman. The second is Fight Club.
Ooh.
And the third is Sweet Home Alabama.
All right, so what do you guys think? First topic, Pretty Women. Jump into it.
We did Pretty Woman as a slight bit of a topic a while back, and I think the first thing that jumps out is, we all think of it as a feel-good movie, but as John so graciously pointed out in a previously episode, it is literally a movie about a hooker. So, that gets down to the brass tacks of it.
It's a hooker with a heart. I think if if there is a lesson to be learned, I think the marketing department with Pretty Woman missed out on that, because I can see that as a tagline. I can see it as bumper stickers. I can see it everywhere, because truly, the hooker had the biggest heart of everyone in the movie. Richard Gere's character was kind of a jerk at the beginning. I mean, he is hiring a prostitute. What's his face? George Seinfeld, Jason Alexander, complete tool. The women in the store where she goes, everybody in the movie is mean except the hooker. And then the other nice person is the other hooker, her roommate, who was played by Laura San Giacomo from Just Shoot Me. Yeah. We talked about that as well, that she went on. So fantastic movie, hooker with a heart.
Yeah. But what was so wonderful and appealing to me, just growing up, you can appreciate the sarcasm. Like with Julia Roberts, she had this perfect way of delivering a line, and recognizable lines that I still say today. I don't care where it is. If someone asks me a question, I'm like, huge mistake, big, it's like you just remember the lines from her.
I loved her. One of my favorite scenes is that when she goes to touch the untouchable necklace and he closes the lid on it and she pulls her hand back, and that you saw what made Julia Roberts so beautiful was her huge smile and that genuine laughter. And I wonder if that scene was actually improvised or if it was real, because it just seemed so genuine at that moment.
Yeah, for me, Wemberley, if you've listened to any of our episodes, I often talk about, I should say, all the remakes that we have right now, particularly of 80s movies, and how, the big mistake that a lot of them make is that they take these iconic characters and they use another actor or actress for them. And this is one of those where you just couldn't do it. That character was built and designed for Julia Roberts, whether they knew that going in or not. She was the perfect person for that. There was nobody else. I'm not even sure that Pretty Woman would be the iconic movie it is if anybody else would have played that role.
Well, and to your point, Chris, we've talked about before how we live in a different world today, and we've said the term, moment in time, a snapshot in time, a world that I don't think they could make that movie today. I think the term problematic is stamped all over it. I joke about Hooker with a Heart, but at the end of the day, they never explain her backstory, why she finds herself exploited, why she's in the industry that she's in. I mean, it is. We understand as people that are more educated, more in tune with things as they are today, that it's problematic. But I think what some people miss out on is that sometimes we have to lay that aside and allow the discussion, but let the movie be the movie.
Well, speaking of not perfect, because she has this new ultra rich millionaire boyfriend that she saved and he saved her. And yet she tells her roommate, she's like, see ya. I don't know how long they lived together or what their backstory was. But like we talked about before, she just tells her hooker roommate, well, it was nice knowing you. Have a good time.
But also, there was a lot of 90s, going into the 90s, like fashion aesthetics. There was music. One of the scenes I remember the most is when she's in the bathtub singing Prince. I mean, it was hilarious. And I often wonder, like, did she do that on purpose? Like, how much of this was ad-libbed? It was hilarious. When they're sitting at the dining room table or in that ballroom having dinner, and she and the oyster or the clam goes flying, and she's like, slippery, he's like, slippery little sucker. Like, are all those things planned? Did this happen? The dresses that she wore, that chocolate brown and beige polka dot, that dress, that is just iconic. And even coming back today, I'm starting to still see, that print come back, and absolutely recognizable. Everyone will say that's where it came from.
Oh, the brown dress when she was doing woo, 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 yeah. And she had, this was one of the world's prettiest hookers too. At the when you get down to it, this is someone who is all dressed up. All you have to do is take her out of her hooker clothes and put her into society. Teach her about one oyster, and pretty soon she's a society girl, and is easily will just fool everybody.
So one of my things on this show is I bring up tropes. And one of the 90s tropes was the fish out of water trope, where you take somebody and you move them, the city mouse and the country, and the 90s was full of them. Movies like She's All That, but that was usually where we saw this trope play out, where it was the shy, introverted girl with the glasses and her hair up, and then all of a sudden, all they need to do is take the glasses off, and she shakes out her hair, and oh my God, she's been gorgeous this entire time. Of course, we need to make her popular. This kind of took that and put it on its head, because she was smoking hot since day one. I mean, there's nothing better on earth than a hooker with a heart, looks, and good hygiene. I mean, that's the triple crown right there.
I was gonna say, she's not bruised. She doesn't have any track marks or anything like that. She's nice and cleanly. Yeah.
Know about cars. I mean,
she knows about cars.
I think you guys just like saying the word hooker, because I think you said it like 50 times already.
Hey, kids are at school.
I'm sorry, good. Chris. Lady of the night.
Working girl.
Hey, that's a great movie too, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting though that, you mentioned the kind of put it on its head with the person that's kind of the fish out of water. And almost the exact opposite of Pretty Woman that came out a few years before, and you almost switched the genders, was Can't Buy Me Love, where you had, Patrick Dempsey is kind of the geek that rode the lawnmower, who was in love with the beautiful popular girl, instead of the wealthy guy, and he wanted to be with her, and he was willing to what? Pay her to be his girlfriend. And of course, all of that backfired in a different way than Pretty Woman, but it is interesting how you see these plots and how you can just take a couple of the pieces, move them around a little bit, and you have a completely different movie, but still in the same kind of universe.
Well, because the trope remains, and that's the thing. And part of that is there's always the discovery when the person is found out, when it becomes obvious that they're in a situation they don't belong in. The pretty girl with her hair down that now finds out that it was all a bet. The kids find out that he was paying her. The world finds out that she is nothing more than a prostitute. I mean, at some point, the plot has to get to the point where this person is discovered, where it's revealed who they really are. And that's what I love about that trope, because what we find out is that's not who they really are. Who they really are is so much beyond that. And it's a simple plot device, but it works. And we see it over and over again. I don't know if I've seen it played out anymore, because again, there is that part of it that who would have thought that paying a girl to be your girlfriend or would be problematic, but apparently it is.
You would know, right, John?
I wouldn't know. There wasn't back when Patrick Dempsey making McDreamy the geeky kid, which back then he kind of was, for sure he was. That might come to a shock to young kids watching, what show is he on now, the hospital thing?
Grey's Anatomy?
He was on that, right?
Yeah.
That would come as a shock. He was like the sexiest man alive again this year, I think, in his 50s or late 40s. That's incredible to me.
It's amazing. That's amazing. And he was in a great movie called Loverboy. But I also would say, with Can't Buy Me Love, that was kind of like for us guys. I was 17, I think, when that came out. That was, I don't want to say it was our Pretty Woman, but certainly for a lot of us, looking at that, we could relate to him and how he was ultimately looking, he felt like she was out of his league. And ultimately, he found out that she was, but if he would have just been himself, maybe she wasn't. And so that's what we find out, that, and I talk about this, the idea of like, that people are like the ocean, you get below the surface and you start to see more interesting things. And so too often we judge people on the surface, kind of like Pretty Woman.
Of course, sometimes in the ocean you can look and see some really terrifying things.
Well, yeah, of course.
So, yeah.
Well, or you
when you get below the surface, sometimes the hooker doesn't have the good hygiene. So, Wimberley, what else? I mean, to jump in, you're going to have to fight for your airtime here.
Okay, so I think one of something we've touched on is the fact that these movies from the 80s and the 90s, they were very endearing to us. They were so simply told, but it was what we wanted to hear. We needed to hear as kids, and they carry on to today. We constantly go back to their lines. We are excited when we see them today, and the actors today. We hold on to that. So I think that's one thing that we can all kind of unite on.
And to your point, Wimberley, I don't think I realized until today how many, you mentioned the bathtub scene where she's singing Prince, and I can close my eyes and see it. I see that, I can literally see it. There's the scene where she's sleeping, and I remember as a kid, her hair is all out around her on the pillow. I don't know if you guys can imagine that scene, but it was as if they took every strand of hair and played, because listen, my wife has beautiful hair, but when it's all around her sleeping, it doesn't look like that. My wife is a beautiful woman, but they must have laid out every single strand of hair individually. They created that look. They curated it. It doesn't exist in the real world. And that movie had so much of that, where the cinematography, but instead of being landscapes, it was the way they arranged the people. Richard Gere coming out of the top of the limousine. It was just these iconic visual moments. And we talk a lot about lines, and I think that's where I tend to go, but I didn't realize that you're right. This movie had those just iconic, legendary, live forever in my mind moments that are more than the lines, more than the stories. It's the visual. I can see it even all these years later.
And it's because of, I believe, I mean, in my opinion, it's because of the actors that they chose for it. That movie would have been entirely different if it had been played by anyone other than Julia Roberts, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I will say this one more thing too, that even though it was a 1990 movie, they obviously filmed it in the 80s for it to be distributed or released in 1990. It did what so many of the 80s movies did, and what I really love and appreciate about them, as snarky and sarcastic as I can be. 80s movies ended, most of them, exactly how we wanted them to. And I think we've lost a little bit of that, and maybe in the idea of trying to be so realistic about everything. John made a good point about, how we didn't really see her backstory. We didn't really see all the really bad stuff that happens when somebody ends up in the industry that she was in. The 80s, though, maybe they were hiding that from us, and you could argue like they really should talk about the bad more as well. But I ultimately look back and I say it was kind of nice and refreshing. And yeah, we look back as adults and say, wow, there's a lot more to that story than they tell us. But that was something I did love about the 80s, is that everything kind of ended the way you wanted it to. Almost every movie was like an Adam Sandler movie. It had a little bit of craziness, and then at the end it had this nice heart. And
a clear beginning, middle, and end that you didn't have to, and we didn't have an option to do so, Google it at the end to figure out, what did I just watch? Well, these movies delivered that straight up. They just told you, this is what you wanted, and this is what I'm going to deliver to you, and I'm going to tell a whole story around it. And I appreciate those stories. I appreciate now that we have to shock people. Well, I don't appreciate. Yeah. We have to shock people with, oh, there was a death that I didn't see coming, in some of these shows. They started to kill off main characters sometimes in shows and do things that were well beyond the plot of the story. In this case, it's a neat package that's all rolled up and has its white knight at the end. And it's a fairy tale. It's a hooker fairy tale. It is a hooker fairy tale.
All right, so I guess this is as good a time as any then. We had Patrick Dempsey that we just discussed, a la Can't Buy Me Love, which he proved you can. And he was also in Sweet Home Alabama, which brings us to segment numero dos of Wimberley's trilogy. What do you guys think? Sweet Home Alabama.
I'm trying to recall the...
Here we go.
No. I know. I got her face. I have her face right in my brain. I just can't think of her name at the moment.
Oh, was it? Who wasn't it? There goes my stammer. What's his face's ex-wife? Yes, tell us.
Reese Witherspoon.
Reese Witherspoon?
Reese Witherspoon, yes. That's it, yes.
So, at least for me, Reese Witherspoon, like, we kind of grew up together. So she was like an icon for me. I started watching her I think her first movie was Man on the Moon, which is very obscure. Not many people remember it. I don't know if you guys remember that, 1981.
Yep.
Her first role. And I immediately watched that and thought, she's my favorite actress in the whole wide world. I don't care if she's 5. And I've watched her ever since then. Sweet Home Alabama had just a really fun touch. Legally Blonde, all those 90s movies. She was, again, just really iconic. She sold those movies. As she does now in anything she does. She just has a really great way about her that has carried on for years.
She's in an incredible show right now called The Morning Show. It's actually an Apple TV exclusive, and it is a really good show. Her and Jennifer Aniston are actually the stars of that show, along with Steve Carell from The Office. And very good show if anybody hasn't watched it.
It's a great show. Love that. Just finished up last season.
One of my favorite Reese Witherspoon's movies, not to get away from Sweet Home Alabama, was and I cannot think of the name of it right now. It's with Marky Mark.
Fear.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Yes. And she ended up marrying, I believe, the co-star, right? It was
Ryan Felipe.
Didn't she marry?
Ryan Felipe was in Fear. He was the friend in Fear. I forgot that he was actually in that. Well, they also were in more succinctly, more dramatically. They co-starred together in Cruel Intentions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Which was also an excellent movie.
Awesome movie.
By itself as well. Yes.
Yeah, they were very good. I was devastated when they got divorced. I felt like it was was like, wait a second, no one asked me about this. So
Oh, you know what, though? You bring up a good point, Wimberly, because a lot of us loved some of the people in the 80s and 90s movies so much that their divorces, we watched them go from falling in love in a particular movie, having children, having a family, and then watching them divorce. And it is, you almost feel like they're, because they were a part of your living room, you almost feel like they were a part of your family as well.
I love that you brought up Man in the Moon.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I love that you brought up Man in the Moon. I love that movie. I remember seeing that movie, and I didn't think it's one of those movies I wouldn't have thought anybody else saw. It was either her and Jeremy London or Jason London. They were twins. I don't remember which. So I always get confused. He was in Party of Five as well. But there were just these movies, the My Girl type movies, where there's this sad thing that happens in the middle. And if you're a fan of the show, you'll know that I have a penchant for certain movies that have sadness in them, where there's a death of a character. Yeah, exactly. But I loved that movie. It was a really sweet movie. Mm-hmm. And, you know, to your point, I didn't realize that's where we got introduced to Reese Witherspoon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any episode we bring up Party of Five is a good episode, by the way. I actually, the two places that I really enjoyed watching her was, I think, one of the most underrated dark comedies, which was Election with Matthew Broderick.
Yeah.
So good.
Is it underrated?
It's so good. And
it can't be underrated.
I think
so. Dude, so good.
I just don't think people talk about it. And I mean, Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon were awesome in it. And then, of course, as Rachel's sister on Friends. I mean, she was awesome. She was amazing in that, too. So,
well, Wimberley said we grew up together. So you're right. You've got her in Man in the Moon, where she's this young kid. And even through Election, she's portraying a young kid in a relationship with a teacher. And we were problematic on so many levels that it's hilarious. But then you're right. Then we take her right into Friends, which seems like yesterday. But that was 30 years ago. And we still see her today in Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston.
Rachel.
So, I mean, it carries right through. But what I love is they grow up with us. They age into their 40s and 50s with us. And yet they hold. I just did a post on social media where I showed the guys that we grew up watching that were our age. The Meryl Steubings, the Mr. Ropers, the Mr. Furleys, the Fish. Abe Vigoda was 54 years old on Barney Miller.
No.
And my wife goes, no, he was 100. I go, no, I'm looking at it. He was 54.
Yeah.
100 would be young. He would look like 130.
I mean, talk about I give up on all things life. The guy just, I'm done at 54. And say what you want about hairstyles. Say what you want about plastic surgery. It's about more than that. Reese Witherspoon, yeah, I don't know if she's had work done or not. I'm sure she dyes her hair. It doesn't matter. They carry this energy with them that is still young and vital. And I think that's what we try to do too. We come out here once a week and play. Say that we're running a podcast or whatever else, but at the end of the day, what we're really doing is hanging out and playing. We're playing a game and talking, and I love that. And I love that actresses like Reese Witherspoon, I develop a lisp every time I say her name, Reese Witherspoon, and Julia Roberts and Brad Pitt that we'll get to in a few minutes, all are in their 40s or 50s, and they carry this youthful energy that I don't see them letting go of, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet Home Alabama, besides Patrick Dempsey, it has been so long since I've seen that movie. Full disclosure there, but I recall it because I knew it was Reese Witherspoon, but there was another man in it. What was the other actor's name?
Josh Lucas. Josh Lucas is the other boyfriend or ex-husband or ex-husband.
That's ex-husband. That's what I was thinking of because I remember him knocking on the door and she answers the door. And then I don't remember what happened after that.
Well, I think it's one of those movies, correct me if I'm wrong, but getting back to tropes, it's like, who's she going to pick? It's the 16 Candles scenario, right? Where there's these two guys, and is she going to pick the obvious choice, the less obvious choice? You know, which way is she going? And that played through the 80s and 90s constantly, and to our point that's running through this entire thing, it ends the way we want it to in most cases, where they pick the guy they should pick. Today, they pick the jerk. Just to shock us, just to piss us all off, so we'd go to the office the next day and talk about it.
I mean, whenever I hear the name Alabama, I sorry, my mind just goes to Alabama Whirly because that was one of my favorite characters in the movie True Romance that came out around similar time, actually a few years before Sweet Home Alabama. Very, very different movie. But, Alabama, I just think Alabama Whirly. You never saw it, John?
You're saying
I'm
it, and
not-
I'm seeing like a dark. Is Bruce Willis? Juliette Lewis? I'm
No,
trying to think who was
Wimberley's
in
seen
it.
it because she started smiling when I said Alabama Whirly, so I know she's seen
It's
it.
been a long time. I
Yeah.
only saw it once, so it's vague, but I remember seeing it.
Christian
It's-
Slater?
Christian Slater.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. I was trying to connect. I know I saw it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, anything
Not a
Christian
Reese
Slater
Witherspoon
was
movie.
in, I'm all for. Kind of like what
Yeah.
you said before. I pump up the volume. Heathers. So yes, and I knew I'd seen it because I don't think he's ever been in something I didn't see.
Gleaming the Cube.
Saw
Okay.
that?
Robin Hood.
Ooh,
Robin Hood.
yeah, bad,
Yeah.
bad
I liked it.
movie. I saw it like
I
4
liked
times
it.
Wait.
in the theater. I liked it too, but it was still a bad movie.
Was Hans Gruber in that Robin Hood with Christian
Yeah.
Slater? Alan
Wait.
Rickman?
Yes,
Alan Rickman?
yes. Alan
Yeah.
Rickman was in that one.
Played the sheriff of Nottingham? Okay.
All right, let's get back to it.
Sweet Home Alabama.
Sweet Home Alabama.
But just to touch
So-
on Christian Slater one more time, because you can't ever do that too many times. That movie with Helen Slater, Legend of Billie Jean, is my
Oh, yeah.
top 2 favorite movies probably of all time.
Really?
Yeah, love that movie. My daughter and I watch it probably once every weekend when I'm like working out. She's like, "Can you put in the movie with the fire?" And the girl with the
All I remember in that
I'm like,
movie is fair is fair. That's all I remember. Fair is fair.
Don't think I've ever seen it.
Which is
Oh,
funny
you have
because,
to.
Shell, you could do that scene with your
Yes.
hairstyle.
Yeah,
I could
you
totally
could.
see you redoing that scene perfectly because
Yes.
she cuts her hair short and just goes to time. You would be perfect emulating that scene.
Yep.
That's how I watch
So
it.
getting
but
back
I don't know.
to Sweet Home Alabama, unless we want to stay on Christian Slater, which, as far as man crushes go, I'm good with that. I totally got his vibe. I liked him a lot. But, so it was Josh Lucas. It was
Mhm.
her. Patrick
Her.
Dempsey. And yeah, I don't want to. Reese Witherspoon.
Oh, Mike Tyson over there.
Yeah, I can't do it. It's too many. Reese Witherspoon. And who
There
else
you
was
go.
in it? I'm guaranteeing you that if we pull up the cast, that is
I
just
pulled it
the kind-
up.
Yeah,
I'm
that is
cheating.
just without even knowing. I can almost guess that is the kind of movie where if I'm like, "Did you know who else was in it?" and I'd be like, "No." It's like, "Did you know this person was in it?" And so that's what I was gonna do. Chris, what do
I
we got?
pulled it up. Unless Wemberley has it.
I have it, but you go ahead. I want to hear so I can pay attention.
All right. So it's got Candace Bergen, Jean Smart. Remember her from Designing Women,
Yeah,
amongst
Oh,
others.
yeah.
Fred Ward. I love Fred Ward. I didn't realize that he was in it. Ethan Embry, who
Okay.
was in, was it Can't Hardly Wait? That he was the kid that was had the crush, I think, and he was really
I think
good
he
in it.
was.
Courtney Gaines, speaking of Can't Buy Me Love, was the kid who, he's like, "You shit on my house." It was his best friend, where they threw the bag of shit at the house, and he's like, in the arcade, he's like, "You shit on my house." He was also Malachi, not Malachi, but in Children of the Corn, he was one of the main characters.
Oh.
He was the kid who said he wants you too, Malachi. Or no, he was
Well,
Malachi. Sorry,
he was Malachi.
Yeah,
Malachi?
yeah he was
And you
Malachi.
mentioned Ethan Embry, who there's hardly an episode we don't talk about the Vacation series, but Ethan Embry, I think, was the son. He played the son in National Lampoon's Vacation, Las Vegas.
Yes.
See.
Yeah, Papa, what was it?
Papadopoulos.
His
Mr.
Papadopoulos.
Papadopoulos.
His fake ID. Yes. So he could gamble. And then also Rona Mitra, who is one of my, I have a huge crush on her. She's been in a lot of movies as well. Probably not, doesn't roll off the tongue in terms of actresses, and then the last one I'll mention is, the last two I'll mention, Kevin Sussman. If you don't know that name and you watched Big Bang Theory, he was, oh my God, Comic Book Kid, Stewart.
Yep.
Stewart. And then Dakota Fanning.
Oh,
who's in it. Yeah.
she must have been
Oh,
really
yeah.
young.
So there you go.
For the little,
Yeah.
she was the young Melanie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I had no idea there were so many
Well, and
people in
that
that
was
movie.
because that's the cool thing is we'll keep coming back to growing up with us, but when you take movies of this era, it's almost inconceivable there wouldn't be someone in there. One of our topics was Mystic Pizza one time, which was another Julia
Inconceivable.
Roberts vehicle, which is when we talked about Pretty Woman, and Matt Damon actually played the role of her little brother, and that was his debut movie. He had hardly any lines, but when we look back to the 80s and 90s movies, these movies that did well, because they did well, helped propel even the people in the smaller roles forward, and then they became the people that we grew up watching as well. And I love that about these movies. All right, so we've talked about Julia Roberts and the Happy Hooker with a Heart movie, also known as Pretty Woman. We've discussed Sweet Home Alabama and Christian Slater, probably more than I thought we would. And moving on now, the next logical step, of course, 2 feel-good movies and a Fight Club. What do you guys think about Fight Club?
Oh, listen, that movie. First of all, Brad Pitt. I mean, he talk about you may have had a man crush on Christian Slater. Like every girl had a crush on Brad Pitt. There's no doubt about it. And Edward, help me with his name.
Norton.
Here.
Edward Norton.
Edward Norton, also in his own right, because he was is an amazing actor. I loved him in the movie where the movie where he was a racist.
American History X.
American History X, yeah.
American History X. Yeah, sometimes they're right off the tip of my tongue. But you can't get wrong. Edward Norton, Brad Pitt together in a movie was incredible to watch.
You don't have to tell me
Yeah.
twice, girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and David Fincher directed it, and David Fincher, I mean, he's one of my favorite directors. He also did Seven, which is incredible. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, he's dark but awesome.
And you mentioned once that David Fincher started out on MTV, right? Directing music videos.
Yeah, he did.
Thought I remembered that. See, I listened to you, Chris.
You listen to my long-winded stories here and there.
No,
you know.
and I even keep it in. So you brought this to us. What are your thoughts around Fight Club, Wimberley? Maybe if we get you to expand on it a little, because I'm still lost on the connection. So let's hear what you've got to say.
All right. So, we've talked about the feel-good movies, but the other side of the 90s was that grunge that really kind of explained the world to me, kind of feeling that everybody kind of sensed at that time. It was like there was just multiple personalities going on in fashion and music, and in movies. And I always found Fight Club was an incredible movie, but my brain was like literally exploding the whole time trying to figure out what was going on. And to understand that there was so much more depth behind it than what I originally thought. It was a bunch of guys just knocking each other out. And, to get to the end, I was just blown away. I remember by the end and by the music. That's when I fell in love with the Pixies. I just loved that music.
Oh,
I would
yes.
just listen to that and just think, God, this is just speaking to us, So there's a lot of depth in that movie to me.
To me, it was, so there's 2 movies that always come to mind where it started I didn't see it coming moment at the end of a movie. And I'm sure it's been done before then, but for me, really hitting hard, wait a minute, are you sure they didn't, they weren't in the same room at the same time twice? And that was a movie that when I finally got to see it at home, I would look for, no, I guarantee you somebody else saw Brad Pitt. When Ed Norton was in the room, they couldn't possibly be the same person. Sixth Sense is the other movie that did that for me as well. Because at the end, I'm like, no way, I know for a fact other people saw him, because but you go back and you watch it and there are no gaps. There are no mistakes.
Right.
They just tricked us. And I'm like, that was cool. To me, that was a switch from the 80s to the 90s. If the 80s were almost feel good, cartoony, fairy tale, friendly, everything. The 90s did. It took that turn from Britney Spears to Nirvana. It went from pop to grunge, and the movies encapsulate a lot of that on some parts of it. And then the other ones like Can't Buy Me Love still continued on, but you had both going on in the 90s. and the soundtrack on Fight Club. Chris, you could probably educate me on this more, but hard edge, amazing music.
Yeah, I mean, when Wimberley mentioned the Pixies, and I love the Pixies, and anytime "Where Is My Mind," that song just, I mean, I don't know, like it just takes me to a different place anytime I hear it. It's like just one of those songs where when I just need a reset, I put on "Where Is My Mind," and it completely just kind of resets whatever's happening, and I'm able to like move on to the next thing. It's such a great sound. But your point, John, too, about the movies with the twists. I mean, Usual Suspects, that was 96, I think. So that's a really good point, actually, that there were these movies in the 90s where they were really holding back and seeing if we could figure it out, but they did such a good job. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's somebody out there that say, oh, I knew what Kaiser Sose was, I knew that. I had no clue until the very end of that movie where I was like, and I was blown away in the same way that I was blown away by Fight Club. At the end, I'm like, hold on a second, wait a minute. I really need to like sit down and figure this out again.
Kind of like people get blown away by the connections between what's going on with our podcast here, right? You're blown away at the end that we come up with these 3 topics and we string the audience along the whole time, possibly even giving out direct clues. And yet still at the end, a lot of times we're just fooled by like an obvious thing that we should have seen all along. Sixth Sense makes me think of that. I should have seen that he was dead the entire time, but I didn't. And just like this, I'm betting one of us has said something that was the connection between these 3 items.
We record these so far in advance that by the time I edit them to release them, it's like I'm watching it for the first time. And I was looking at Chelle's video that talked about 3 topics while I was editing, and I'm like, I said the connection like no less than 12 times throughout the entire podcast episode. And then at the end, she's like, so what do you guys think? I'm like, I got nothing. I'm like, you moron. You idiot. What do you mean you've got nothing? Do you not hear yourself talk? And I'm like, wow, I really do just let things come out of my mouth without thinking about it at all, because literally saying, and then Sixth Sense, and then Fight Club. You're right. We see it. We experience it. We're like, something's off. And then we're like, nah. And then the reveal comes, and it's just that you've got to be kidding me moment. And it's been a long time since, instead of you've got to be kidding me moments, today's movies are like, you got to be kidding me moments. It's like, come on, Same words, different emotion.
Well, I want to go back to what Wimberley said about, Ed Norton and Brad Pitt being together on screen in a movie. And, we do see that today, but I mean, the heavy hitters together, when you think about like the movie, another 90s movie, Heat, and the only reason it's in my head is because Heat 2 is being worked on right now by Michael Mann. But you think about Heat, and you had, was it De Niro and Pacino sitting at a table together, I think? And, just the heavy hitters, Pitt and Brad Pitt and Ed Norton.
Were they heavy hitters then, though, Chris? Pitt, maybe. I don't know if Edward Norton. Was this before or after Primal Fear?
That was after Primal Fear.
So Fight Club was after.
That was after Primal Fear.
Primal Fear was 97.
And Brad Pitt was already Thelma and Louise and Legends of the Fall. I mean, he was, these guys were, they weren't Pacino and De Niro. They didn't have 30 years behind them, but certainly like seeing those two together, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And this was a big time for Brad Pitt. Again, he was in, in the movies like, Legends of the Fall and Interview with a Vampire. Like he was really becoming a very well-known and very popular actor at the time. That was, it was really his time to shine.
Well, and we can't go through Fight Club without talking, at least mentioning. We always talk about lines. Do kids still know if you guys, Wimberley, if you talk to your teenager today, or Rochelle, if you said to your sons today, we don't talk about Fight Club, would they have a clue?
No. But I remember saying that.
We all said it.
First rule of Fight Club. Nobody talks about Fight Club.
What's interesting too is that it actually spawned fight clubs. Even, real fight clubs. And like, that's what's also interesting about the movie Fight Club is that we have these movies that they go beyond just the cultural references and the impact it had on pop culture and actually create something in society. Maybe it was there all along and it just kind of came to the surface, but You have Fight Club. I mean, we've talked in the past about movies like Jaws, where people were never afraid to go in the water, and then suddenly they had this fear of going in the water after Jaws. My mom used to tell me that after Psycho came out in the late '60s, there were so many of her and her friends who would always shower like looking out of the shower curtain, like really, like this impact that it had on real things in life beyond just the pop culture references that we enjoy.
Well,
Well, I think
it just reminds me of, it's totally off topic, but here I go again. It reminds me of a funny story. But the thing that I was scared of is I was scared to go to the bathroom after the movie Alligator came out because they put the alligator down in the sewer. You remember that one? And I would sit there and I'm looking down between my legs, like trying to make sure an alligator wasn't going to come up out of the toilet and bite my butt. So Wimberley, in Fight Club, then getting back to Fight Club for a second, what do you find to be the most iconic scene in Fight Club, or what's the most memorable for you that really puts it at the top of your list of movies that you brought here for us today?
Brad Pitt, basically. No, it was the 90s and the actors for me. Like, and to me, he was one of those that, like, just stands out. Julia Roberts, Brad Pitt in the movie. I just thought, again, it's the way that they deliver lines. It's their like little bit of wit, little bit of sarcasm, just these lines that we're always going to remember. And that to me is what I felt like he had a great way of bringing some sarcasm, some comedy to the movie, and then just like this darkness too. And I just don't feel like a lot of actors can encompass that sometimes. I mean, I can't imagine having tried to film that movie. It was a very complex movie that I felt like he did a great job in. And he did the
loved
same
Brad
thing
Pitt.
in 12 Monkeys.
You just took the words out of my mouth. I loved Brad Pitt. I loved him in all of his movies. I loved 12 Monkeys. I read the book A River Runs Through It and then saw him play in that movie. And that's an underrated movie. If you've never seen A River Runs Through It, Robert Redford narrates it. It's like reading on screen. It was a beautiful movie.
And you have to mention, when you talk about Brad Pitt, you got to mention the movie Snatch. I mean, the gypsy character, the character that he played, it was amazing. I mean, I honestly, like, it wasn't a super deep character, but it was one of his best performances. You don't understand a word he's saying, and it's by design, but I've watched it enough times where I now know exactly what he's saying, but he's so good at that character, and it just was so different for like, to your point, he can play any type of character. He can go from, Legends of the Fall or A River Runs Through It to playing 12 Monkeys. Was he Tyler Durden in Fight Club?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tyler Durden. And then, of course, can't remember his name in Snatch, the gypsy, but these three like completely different roles from like the pretty boy. And that's what I appreciate about him, because, although he could have just traded on his looks, and he did at times, he also is a much deeper actor than that, and was willing to say, I can do that. I don't have to trade on my looks. I can be this character. I don't need to look good every time I film a movie. And you got to give him credit for that, because it would have been easy to just trade on looks the entire time.
He had no problem being ugly in movies too.
Yeah.
12 Monkeys. He's like,
No
I can
problem.
be ugly.
Yeah.
It works. But ugly Brad Pitt is still 3 steps above the best I've ever looked. So I mean, it's not that hard to allow yourself to look ugly when you're Brad Pitt.
Just 3 steps?
Come on, Chris.
Okay, so are we going to pull these together, or are we going to try to figure them out?
Well, do you guys have anything else you want to hit on Fight Club? So I just want to make sure we're not missing anything before we jump out. Are we missing anything, Wimberley?
No. And you guys
Okay.
have touched on things several times.
Things.
I
All right, so we've
Things.
to encapsulate a little bit, to bring things together. We've talked about Pretty Woman. We've talked about Sweet Home Alabama. We've talked about Fight Clubs and Christian Slater and Patrick Dempsey and all kinds of people in the past 45 minutes or so. And I'm not sure if that brings us any closer to our hidden topic, but what do you think, Wimberley? How are we doing?
That you guys have touched on it several times and have gotten very, like, you've like literally hit on it several times, like you've said it. But it doesn't involve how the movies are intertwined. I'll give you that much.
Okay.
So what do you think, guys? Chelle?
I had two theories from the start, but I couldn't put them together. One of them being that I was thinking that there was a common thread between the three main actors of somebody that they had, something that they had been in, but then I couldn't think of anything that they were in together. Somebody that they had dated, and I was thinking of a dating thing. But then the second idea I had was about how the movies themselves were. When you said, John, about the characters and how they fit, that they were those roles, then I started thinking about dialects, and then I started thinking the Sweet Home Alabama, and the movie itself is actually Reese Witherspoon's accent. You know, and I was thinking there would be something together with that, but I can't quite put it together.
If I don't have connection, I think I've got eight, and I think, Chris, you actually said it. So I think you and I might have it. I'm going to write it down, but let you talk about it. And then I did this to Chelle during one, and she was horribly, embarrassingly wrong. But I'm going to let Chris reveal, but I'm going to write it down because I want my equal credit.
I think I'm as close as I've ever been, and you have to understand, Wimberley, that of the group of us, if we're going to use a reference here that's going to be my tie, I am the Joey Tribbiani of the group. I never seem to get anything right because my brain just doesn't go as fast. However, I'm going to say that all of them had guest starring roles in Friends. So Julia Roberts, Reese Witherspoon, and Brad Pitt were all guest stars on the show Friends.
Read that. What does that say?
Friends?
It says Friends?
It says Friends.
Yeah.
That was my connection, too. They all, Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, and Reese Witherspoon were all on Friends. That's not it?
Are we ready for this?
Is that it?
Yeah, I think.
I mean, unless... Oh, yes!
This isn't even one
I got it! I got it!
Oh my God. Remember when we said that sometimes these things are right in front of us the whole time and we don't see it? She had it right in front of us the whole time.
That's awesome.
It's like, you know.
It's on her shirt for the listening audience. Wimberley is wearing the iconic Friends title logo on her shirt, which she had not even cleverly, because it was right there, hidden right underneath of her shirt. Right there.
Several times you guys mentioned, and also to get even further into that is you also mentioned the connection to Jennifer Aniston. So while they were on Friends with her, they're also one in the Today Show. She and Reese Witherspoon. Let's see, she was married to Brad Pitt. She was in Mother's Day with Jennifer Roberts, and they're actually making another movie now called Body Swap. So they all have that connection with her, which makes me kind of wonder if that's why they all were on the show in the first place. But who knows? But yes, it was the Friends.
I'm so happy.
Guest star appearances and Friends.
I'm so happy. I feel...
You guys mentioned Friends at least 5 times. Like, I was just dying. You said something about
she was Julie Roberts was Susie Underpants.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then Reese Witherspoon was the sister, and of course Brad Pitt's the whole teeny weenie at Thanksgiving was amazing.
The Rachel Hate Club. I hate Rachel Club. Yeah, as soon as, I don't know what it was, Chelle was talking. Chelle will go deep. Chelle will pull out these philosophical connections, these dialect connections, these, they both share a genome tracking back to Western Europe connections. And I was just thinking in my head, I'm like, wow, she goes deep. It's probably something right in front of us. And in that moment, I'm like, it's Friends. So, but I wanted Chris to have his moment, but I also wanted my credit, which is why I wrote it down. So I do get credit for this. So in this, they say there's really never more than one winner, but in this case there is. There's only one loser, but there's 2 winners.
Yeah.
I sparked your imagination on that one.
I mean,
way deeper than my brain. My brain's just like, oh, characters on Friends.
It's
Going on, I was like, yeah, that's true.
it's two of my favorite episodes. I mean, that's the great thing about this episode. That two, I love the show Friends. It's like my comfort food. It's like that comfortable pair of jeans. I always have it on in the background. I fall asleep to it still.
Same.
And those two episodes, Susie Underpants and the Thanksgiving episode. I mean, they're classics. And
Yeah.
the I Hate Rachel Club. I mean, I just love that scene where she's like, "What? You guys had a club? Who was in it? Me and Ross." And he's like, "You don't have to point. She knows who Ross is."
It just shows his quirkiness though. That's like the whole point of like they're in all three of them in Friends and their guest episodes, they're all that character that are still like sassy, witty, funny
Mhm.
characters that we know them to be, right? And
Yeah,
you'll always remember
absolutely.
those episodes. I mean, you remember even Reese Witherspoon as being, the sister. It's just like
I love
30
it.
years ago, we're still remembering it. So, yeah.
It doesn't
Yams!
feel
Good
like
job.
30 years ago. It doesn't. I cannot wrap my head around the fact that Friends was 30 years ago. It's still relevant. And maybe
Mhm.
that's the way our parents always looked at things too, but the 90s still feel very relevant, feel very much still on task, still relevant. I don't know how else to put it. It doesn't feel old.
Well, I mean, even if you take a look, like, I've seen some people talking about how clothing, like, you can actually define the clothing of the 50s, define it in the 60s, define it into the 70s, and maybe into the 80s. Beginning of the 90s, maybe with grunge, but nothing has, you could probably put on a 90s outfit right now. And not because it's come back into style, but because they're not significantly different. There hasn't been anything that was significantly different, if you ask me. And Wimberley, maybe you could speak to this a little bit more. Clothing styles haven't changed all that much. I mean, t-shirts are still t-shirts,
Right.
that we wear now.
All right. I'm pretty sure this blue shirt is from like 99 or 2000. Like, I mean, but it's still
Yeah.
being worn today. Like, it's just,
Right. And not because it's a vintage look either. It actually works today as today's clothing choices. You can, of course, put bell bottoms on and then that's a vintage look.
Mhm.
But bell bottoms are distinctly 70s, and I don't think you could look at the 90s or the 2000s or the 2010s and say this was the look of the 2010s and this was the 2000s.
Well, the one male fashion trend that makes me laugh when I watch the Friends in the late 90s, Chandler, in his processing job, the earth colors, the earth tones for the jackets with the ties that all had like either earthy or like the kind of, I don't want to, they weren't plaid, it was paisley. The
Paisley, I remember
paisley
paisley.
and the earth colors. That's the one thing that whenever I see Chandler in those jackets and those ties, I'm like, yep, I was wearing that in the late 90s when I went into the office. But one of the things, Wemberley, that I really love about this episode that you brought into it is that we've talked on past episodes about one of the things that's missing again today are the guest stars. And if you go back and you look at Friends and you see the parade of guest stars that they had beyond the three that we're talking about today, it's incredible how many people were actually on that show. Some just for an episode, others a character. Tom Selleck became a character, and Richard. John Lovitz showed up a couple of times. What's his name from
Paul Rudd.
Played the Paul Rudd.
Paul
Yes,
Rudd
Paul
started
Rudd.
as a guest star and ended up a main character.
Fisher Stevens was on an episode. Michael Rappaport was on
I
a
was
few
just gonna say
episodes. I mean,
Rappaport, yep.
yeah, it's just amazing. It's
I
incredible.
just think you killed the irony of it, Wimberley, because you're the guest star who came on, and your
Yeah.
connection was that the three topics were guest stars. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you wore it on your shirt for those watching, and you literally embody the connection because you're the guest star who made guest starring her connection. Since we're on the reveal topic and we're talking about Friends, I just want to ask a question, and people, please, in the comments, feel free to see yours. I'd love to see what people think and if the same one keeps popping up. If you could only watch one Friends episode And that's it. That's the only episode to survive. What is your favorite?
The obvious is the one with Rachel and Ross when they break up. That was like, again, that was like an 80s movie. You know, you just didn't want to see it happen. And you're just like so hoping that it was not going to end that way.
I think speaking of the iconic things we used to say, I can remember saying, "We were on a break." Yeah.
Mine would be obviously the Thanksgiving one with Brad Pitt. I just laughed the entire time. And
That's my favorite.
Even down, the librarian that was 50 years old, and you know, she's like, it was the eyes. And the other one was it wasn't the one where they all find out, but it was really, really close, where Joey was still the only one who knew about Monica and Chandler. And Rachel looks in and he's eating fried chicken and he's got he finds the Polaroid of Monica and she gets so upset. She's like, he takes naked pictures of us and he eats fried chicken. And that whole scenario where he still is the only one and they're like, please don't tell anybody. That was a great one too.
I think my favorite episode was the one where the biker came in and he put his leg up on the couch.
Oh,
And he put his leg up on the couch and everybody's going, oh.
Oh, yes. Put the mouse back in the house. Yeah.
yeah. Gunther's classic line.
Oh, God.
Guest stars, I guess it was in my face. I never realized before this very moment how critical to Friends' success their guest stars were, because there was every fifth episode seemed to have a guest star. You know, some of them were recurring, some popped in and out. But I'd said in the past that shows like Love Boat that I grew up loving as a kid, I loved because of the guest stars, and they never did that again. But Friends did it. And now that I think about it, Chris, you've mentioned Big Bang Theory did it. Mm-hmm. I think some of my favorite shows follow that pattern. And I guess I didn't realize that was something I really yearned to. I love when a cast is joined by a guest star, which is probably why my favorite episodes of this podcast are the ones where we have a guest star.
I mean, yeah, we could go on. It feels like it was something that everybody was striving for to be on that show. In the same way, Wimberley, that we've talked about music and music being a big part of your life, and we've always talked about how in the 80s that every band and musician wanted to be on a soundtrack. Like that was something they wanted to be on. They strived to be on a soundtrack. Yeah. It feels like people wanted to be a guest star on Friends, and they were probably having their agents call to say, hey, build a character for so-and-so.
Yeah. Or they just knew someone like Brad Pitt. They were married, I think, at that point that he was on there. He and Jennifer Aniston, I think.
They were married.
A year. Yep. That had something to do with it. So.
Well, Wimberley, I hope you enjoyed it.
This was fantastic. I mean, you guys getting the connection at the end was just the best. I saw, John, your eyes, you were like...
I have gotten several of these connections. I just want you to know, I think I was the very first one on this show to actually make a connection. So there we go.
I think I'm at like 3.5. I think I got you tied now. I'm the only one that keeps track of tabs. I'm taking my half points.
People that don't know, John is incredibly competitive. Yeah. Incredibly competitive. So...
Well, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of the Three View Mirror podcast. Positive one, where even though the answer was right in front of our face for those watching, it took us till the end to get there. But hey, we got there. I will be the first to sign off by saying could not be happier that Wimberley joined us. We're so glad you could join us and play today, and I know this won't be the last time. As long as you're willing, we'd love to have you on again soon. For myself, this is John Catrides, better known as Gen X Jono, signing off and saying be cool.
And this is Michelle Novak, better known as Gen X Chelle, and see you soon.
This is Chris Clues, better known as Chris Clues. Stay rad, everybody.